Today is a relaxed presentation about someone probably you know. Can I see a show of hands how many people are familiar with Emily Wilding Davison? I mean, look around, you'll see. I think she is probably the best known suffragette besides the Pankhursts, right? She's most famous for, of course, her death, which is still a topic of much interest and research. This talk is much more concerned with her life. I'm very interested in celebrating her spirit and especially her love of the concept of comradeship, which is her own, but I feel like was really amplified by her readings of Walt Whitman. And I'm coming to you today, not as a scholar of Davison, but as a Whitman scholar who happened upon this very unusual cross-gender, transatlantic, remarkable connection that I wanted to share with you. So there's some neat little discoveries in here. I'm going to talk hopefully for about 30 minutes, take some Q&A. So please think of those questions, save them for the end. I really want to hear from you. And then Chelsea has very kindly allowed me to display some of the remarkable treasures of the Davison collection up at the Women's Library. Have you all been upstairs to the Women's Library? Well worth a visit. They have the whole history. And as Chelsea says, there's an exhibition on the Women's Library just as you enter the LSE library on the left, that little room there. So it's 100 years old. It's only been here 10, how many years at LSE? Maybe 12. So it was an independent organization before that, and is now hosted by LSE, which is doing a really good job protecting the archives. So you have here, for instance, I have a purse out that she was holding at Epsom when she was hit by the horse and the ticket that was in there. So please stick around to take a look at it. We can look at it very casually and you can answer all sorts of questions. And Chelsea even said we can delicately handle the material that's in the Mylar, which includes her notes on force feeding. So some really cool stuff there. So a huge thank you to Chelsea Cullison, who manages the events here, and your team, Maria and Jillian and Jillian. Mm-hmm. Hi, Jillian. I've only corresponded. I teach at NYU in New York City. So really happy to be here and again, to forge this transatlantic connection. So as you can see here, I'm starting with a monument. There's been quite a few installations of memorials and monuments to Davison, which is sort of surprising because the way she went was under fire, right? She got a lot of flack for what she did. So she's finally truly martyred in many ways. People think of her as a true hero. And I wanted to highlight this memorial just put up in 2021 in Epsom for many reasons. But first, just a little look at Emily herself. You can see this is probably her most famous portrait. That one is displayed quite a bit. Very interestingly, she's wearing her hunger strike medal. If you know her, does anyone know how many times she went on hunger strike in the prisons when she was imprisoned for protesting? 7 times. She was in prison 7 times. And actually her Holloway badge symbolizes being in the prison called Holloway. So she's wearing a number of emblems and pins that were designed by Christabel Pankhurst and distributed as a form of kind of bracing these amazing women putting their life on the lines for the cause of women being able to vote. So you can see she's got many badges on her hunger strike medal. She was force-fed 49 times. It's the type of number that you can only, I can't even fathom. And of course it is torture, right? It is a form of torture, which is acknowledged now. So I'm not going to talk that much about it, but just to keep in mind what this woman went through. Again, in the name of women receiving the vote and an equal place in society. She joined the WSPU, the Women's Social and Political Union, that Emmeline Pankhurst set up in 1903. Emily joined in 1906. And she was paid in the beginning and quickly became quite militant. I think she's very well known for her actions, right? Maybe you remember the goose box stories, right? Putting, you know, related equipment in post boxes and blowing them up, or breaking windows, right? Often with household items. If you have not been to the Pankhurst Center in Manchester and you are a fan of this, I urge you to go, because they have on display some of the, the mallets, the kitchen stuff that these women would use to make really bold statements. And Emily quickly became very, very much indebted inside of the cause, and wound up doing things like, she, in 1911, when the census was being taken, she hid in a cabinet in Westminster Abbey, in a small church there, in order to sort of place herself on the census as part of that institution, and kind of representing this idea that she should have the vote. As someone who's being taxed, she should also have a say in what goes on in British culture. And they have a plaque there to go visit, and you can take a photo of yourself next to the little closet where she actually hid overnight in order to be counted at Westminster. So on the right, there is the newspaper just the day after that she died. That's the closest I'm going to get to depicting the way she died. This is still a debated point, right? She was at the Epsom Derby on June 4th, 1913, and she was very close to the last bend in the racetrack. And supposedly now they've done studies about where she was studying, and it looks like she had visibility of the horses coming down the track, because people have doubted whether or not she had an intentional horse in mind. But it does look like she had the king's horse, King George V's horse, in mind. The horse's name was Anmer, Anmer. And at the very last minute, she stepped onto the track. My best guess is that she was trying to pin a WSPU flag on the bridle of the horse, kind of a huge statement, right? Especially if the horse would win. And the horse hit her. And this image at the bottom is showing you the horse was basically running as fast as a train would go at that time, about 35 miles an hour. So she was completely bowled over. The horse rolled over its jockey. The horse got up. The jockey actually got back up and rode, and 2 weeks later was back on the horse in another race. So life weirdly went on for the horse and rider. But for Emily, she was immediately hospitalized, and she lived another 4 days and died famously, the coroner said, does anyone remember? By misadventure. Not suicide, but maybe sort of a momentary lapse of reason, just stepping out, not realizing the weight and force of the horse that is coming at her, and dying as a result. She was disabled from all of the force feedings to begin with. She had also, at one point when she was in prison, thrown herself off the iron balcony and fallen 10 feet, again, as this statement, damaged her vertebrae in her neck. And there are some photos of her from later where you can see her face is sagging, and she really, really suffered. She had lost teeth during the force feeding. It's part of the difficulty, actually, of the sculptor, Christine Charlesworth, because she writes about, the difficulty with deciding how you would depict Emily's face. Apparently, she was a very vibrant person. She loved to smile. She loved poetry. She studied poetry at St. Hugh's in Oxford. She loved children. She was vivacious. You'll see that even in her writing, comes off the page. But because of her broken teeth and all of the things that happened, Charlesworth decided to give her a kind of a really gentle smile here. But I really think that there's a lot of interesting noteworthy points about this monument that I wanted to highlight, and I would love to hear from you all. Has anyone seen it in Epsom? It's on the high street at Epsom, so it's right smack in the center of town. You can't miss it. And I had to include this. Of course, it's designed to be humanized, right? She's not on a plinth. She's not looking down at you. She wants you to sit next to her so that you can talk with her. So a lovely thought that way. There is a plaque here, and the nice thing about it, it not only mentions, of course, what happened, but it says here, following her death, these milestones were achieved towards the full voting rights. And in 1918, property-owning women over 30 started voting. 1928, all women over 23. And then 1968, does anyone know this? All women over 18. So it's pretty recent. And 18-year-old women can vote in the UK. And it didn't obviously happen immediately after this incident, but of course, this was part of what needed to happen in order to kind of move society along to thinking about women. I like the detail on her lapels. We just talked about the Holloway pin, which Charles Worth has really nicely represented, the hunger strike medal, which is here. She's holding the census. So a nice way to remind us of what she famously did with the 1911 census, right? Like Heidi in Westminster. And here next to her is the thing that interests me most. She's got the mortarboard, right? So again, she was highly educated. A point that sticks in my mind is that her parents were very vastly different in age. Her mother was 19 when Emily was born, and her father was, I think, 26 years older. Really wide difference. He was retired when she was born. But I think as a result, she got a lot of attention and a really solid education, both at home. And then she actually went to St. Hugh's at Oxford. But she did not get the degree because Oxford didn't give women degrees at that time. So very frustrating. She earned an honors, a first degree, but never saw it. And I think that's just a lovely tribute to her intellectual capacity that really was not honored at her time. And she's got 3 books by her side, right? That's the whole sculpture of her, and then these 3 books on this bench. One of them is a Bible, which makes sense, right? She was a devout Christian, and a lot of this idea of martyrdom comes from that side. She's getting that energy from her reading and training. Chaucer is the other one. She studied medieval literature, and a lot of people have written about this, the influence of medieval spiritualism and women in medieval culture and so forth. Makes sense. And you could probably guess what brought me here is the 3rd book, Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Oh my God. Whitman was such a radical poet that it is quite uncommon to see Leaves of Grass on any public monument. That includes the United States. So when I heard about Walt being represented at Epsom, I had to dig in. And I found some very interesting things that connect these two. So let me lead you down that path. I'll give you a bit of background on Whitman, because I'm not sure. I know some people here are very, very knowledgeable about him, but just running on the assumption, a bit of background. Whitman was a American, a 6th-generation American, actually, born on Long Island and moved to New York City, famously New York's first poet. And some people know best poems like Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, which really honor the idea of an urban affection, some people say. And he was a working man, so he trained as a printer. He was a sometime carpenter. He edited newspapers in Brooklyn and kind of fell under the spell of Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American man of letters at the moment, and really had in mind to begin American poetry. So from nowhere, I'm actually writing his biography, so I know it's nowhere, but it feels that way when you hear the story. In 1855, previously publishing about 22 pretty prosaic poems. Whitman comes out with a book on your screen here, Leaves of Grass, 12 poems, first 6 of which are titled Leaves of Grass, totally confusing. Last 6 don't have titles. And they shock everyone, right? They get a lot of attention, a lot of negative attention, a lot of negative reviews. He has really a lot of trouble selling the book, right? And you can see that he hasn't put his name anywhere, not on the cover, not on the spine. The title page looks like Brooklyn wrote it, which I love. This for Brooklyn. All you get is this very remarkable frontispiece, which is remarkable in that his legs are depicted. A lot of frontispieces are the shoulders on up because it's the scene. Why would you have to see someone's body who writes poetry? Whitman was the poet of the body and the poet of the soul. This is really part of Davison's attraction to him, right? This equalization of the importance of what you do with your body. Maybe you sacrifice your body, right? And that equivalency to the soul. And I think she was also probably very interested in how connected he was with women and also how much he suffered in order to get his message across, which was very much based in my title, right? Comradeship, a word that I feel like we need to hear these days, right? Just coming from the US or New York, I should say, which is rioting right now about what's happening in the Middle East. But just a few things. Whitman's book is very unusual looking. You know, most of the time at that time, mid-19th century, you'd see like nice little fat brown volumes, right? Thoreau, Emerson, they were all nicely matched in sets. A lot of publishers were quite well known for doing that kind of thing. Whitman couldn't get a publisher. That's why there's no publisher on that title page. And he designed the book himself, and he had his friends, these Scottish brothers, the Rome brothers, printed it in Brooklyn. And probably not a lot of play with how he could design it, but it does look remarkably like this book, which is Fresh Fern Leaves by Fanny Fern. She was the first woman to get paid as a journalist in the United States, and Whitman was very friendly with her. So, you know, possibly there's not a connection, but I wanted to show you the similarity of the covers, this sort of summer green foliage. It looks like a lady's wreath, what we would call a lady's wreath in the United States, this type of book designed for women to enjoy, right? A parlor book. And just a few examples of these very sloppy hand-printed pages. Whitman was a printer, as I told you, so he actually has a part in how this turned out. And I've seen many fingerprints in there's about 200 copies in the world right now. And there's a 50 chance that that we have his marks on those pages. Just giving you some examples of the ways in which he talked about women that really outraged most people. But then people like Davison would respond really, they must have been shocked, right? To not just celebrate women, but just even celebrate their bodies, put their bodies right on the page. And you can see here, this is actually pretty erotic. If you get down to the last few lines, right? Ebb stunned by the flow, flow stunned by the ebb, love flesh swelling and deliciously aching. You can see why he was really banned in Boston, as they say, in 1882. But his language is always balanced. In other words, he uses he and she or he. And if you look at the description of the sex, it's kind of both sides are having fun, right? He does that. And this is the next page of that part here. I actually really love these last few lines, which kind of show that Whitman recognized the female in himself. As I see my soul reflected in nature, as I see through mist one with inexpressible completeness and beauty, see the bent head and arms folded over the breast. Female, I see the bearer of the great fruit, which is immortality. The good thereof is not tasted by the ways in the kingdom. So not just a celebration of the female, but a recognition that maybe we are all kind of female in some way, and celebrating that sort of mix. Fluid is a word that I use quite a bit when I talk about the way Whitman conceptualized sexuality, including his own. So the fun part is seeing how he was critiqued at the time. And he actually enjoyed it. I'm showing you a little, it's a tiny little book. It sells for tens of thousands of dollars now. But Whitman had these printed up when the third edition of Leaves of Grass came out as a promo. And he would give it away. You could write to him and he would send this to you. And what it is it's a collection of reviews of the first two editions. That's all it is. And by the way, he wrote his own reviews. So you're reading some Whitman in there as well. And they were best reviews also. This one. Second paragraph. The depth of his indecencies will be the grave of his fame, or ought to be, if all proper feeling is not extinct. The very nature of this man's compositions excludes us from proving by extracts the truth of our remarks. But we, who are not prudish, emphatically declare that the man who wrote page 79 of the Leaves of Grass deserves nothing so richly as the public executioner's whip. Okay, it's getting to the force feeding level, right? I just showed you page 79. That was the first page I showed you. So just to see what people were reacting to. Another funny story, when Whitman was first published, the first British edition of it, which you see to the right here, done by William Rossetti, famously allied with the pre-Raphaelites, was quite censored. And the poems reflected that, but easier for me to show you that they actually censored the image of him. And this is just an aside, but Whitman famously had his crotch altered by the brass engraver because he didn't feel that the lines were full enough. I kid you not. This is Walt Whitman we're talking about. So there was a lot of attention to the bottom half of Walt. And I guess Rossetti and also the publisher Hotten, right, who often got in trouble for doing radical publications. They tried to escape notice by chopping poor Walt off at the chest, so you don't get to see that famous crotch area. So a little bit confusing about how Leaves of Grass is printed. The title remains in play, and Whitman continuously changes the book, right? He's always adding poems, changing the poems that are there, changing titles. He's very much a fluxus artist. He's always in motion. And this is the second edition of Leaves of Grass. And to the left is the very first image we have of anyone holding any copy of Leaves of Grass. And I had to include it in this talk because it's one of my favorite photos. There's so much to do here, right? With the way she's holding the book. And also how smart she is and how together and how, I don't know, she looks so intelligent and strong and connected, right? She's fearless about holding that book, which is getting a lot of critical attention. And she's also holding it over her crotch. I don't know if that's intentional, looks intentional to me. It's also flipped upside down, as you can see, almost, I always think maybe she's thinking she's going to lift it like this. And I'm not sure why she flipped it. She's wearing sort of an upper middle class outfit, right? She looks like a woman who probably had an education. Beautiful earrings, very put together, a hair bracelet, which were popular, right? Hair of people who died that you wanted to remember. And I got to include, a lot of what I'm talking about is material culture today. And the story of this daguerreotype is very fun because Don Osborne, who I met, paid $37 for it in the year 2000 because nobody knew that was Leaves of Grass. They thought it was a book called Leaves and Grass. So he put in his and actually has this student, this photo, first photo of anyone reading Leaves of Grass. And that 1856 edition is often called the women's edition, simply because of the number of poems that focus on women. If you look, the first poem Poem of Walt Whitman, which is actually Song of Myself later, same, well, edited the same poem. Poem of Women is second, right? And if you look at the names of the titles, poems of the daily work of the workmen and workwomen of these states, right? Pointed inclusion of women. This was something that really attracted a lot of following of the women's rights movement in the US. And there are really excellent books. Sherry Siniza is a scholar that I really love, and she's written about women in 19th century American reformers. Michael, you know that book, fabulous. I just didn't know that she reached so far into the future and to Britain, to the suffragists here. That's new to me. Oh, and I just wanted to show you, I mean, this one was, of course, a target for many censors. Unfolded only out of the folds of the woman, man comes unfolded and is always to come unfolded. Unfolded only out of the superbest of the earth is to come the superbest man of the earth. So it's giving precedence to women, right? It is about childbirth, but it is about how women proceed, right? Men come from women. But maybe most remarkably, it also is about a woman's body part, right? He's actually exposing, he's putting women proudly on the page, as I mentioned here. So that's the sort of energy that actually made people do this. Clip out, even if they bought a copy of Leaves of Grass, they would clip out poems like that because even a radical reader of the time would have trouble with some of Whitman's formulations. This poem, and this is a book in a collection, actually the foremost collector of Whitman in the world is a woman, Susan Taine, who I know very well. She's very proud of owning this copy. And just to give you a bit on what was clipped out, it is really about women enjoying sex. It is, well, a woman waits for me. She contains all. Nothing is lacking. Yet all were lacking if sex were lacking, or if the moisture of the right man, not the one you're supposed to marry, the one that you want to be with, right? So an acknowledgement of female desire that a lot of women read and were tremendously excited about. So, oh yeah, I threw this one in too. Whitman, when Bronson Alcott went to visit Walt Whitman with Thoreau in 1856, Whitman had gotten enough sort of weird praise that even someone like Alcott, that's the father of Louisa May, and himself a very famous writer, and of course Thoreau, right? They go to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is a whole, right, compared to Boston, the Northeast, much more finessed, much more literary. They go through the sort of like developing suburb of Brooklyn, and they walk upstairs and they see Walt's chamber pot because they go into Walt's bedroom. He's like sitting on his bed. His chamber pot is partly exposed. But the thing that really shocks Bronson Alcott the most is that Whitman is wearing bloomers. Now, you may know the story about Amelia Bloomer, who is a 19th century American activist. And she invented kind of this idea of women's pants, basically a split skirt. And I love this photo, actually, this married couple, very powerful looking people. And she is wearing one of those, right? It looks like a skirt, but you could do things more easily. They were really, and we still use this word bloomer, right, for kind of loose shorts. This is Alcott writing about what he saw when he walked into Whitman's bedroom. Broad-shouldered, rouge-fleshed, Bacchus-browed, bearded like a satyr and rank. Whitman wears his man bloomer in defiance of everybody, having these as everything else after his own fashion, and for example to all men hereafter. Red flannel undershirt, open-breasted, exposing his brawny neck, striped calico jacket over this, the collar by Romeo, with coarse cloth overalls buttoned to it, cowhide boots, heavy roundabout, with huge outside pockets and buttons to match a slouched hat for house and street alike. So I remember Gary Schmidgall in the gay Walt Whitman. Whitman was queer. Writes something like, this sounds like a clubber from the 19th century, right? Cowboy boots and everything. And I'm still not convinced that they were necessarily bloomers. Maybe he just like tucked loose pants into the boots. But for Bronson, and for many people who read Bronson and believed him, Whitman wore women's pants, also cross-dressing in the middle of the 19th century. So it's not just the work, it's the life that attracted people like Anne Gilchrist. And in the audience, we have Michael Robertson, who has written so brilliantly on the relationship between Anne Gilchrist, a very well-established writer in Britain. She actually lived in Hampstead. She fell in love with Whitman through language. And her husband, Alexander Gilchrist, had been the biographer of William Blake. Maybe you know the name. And he had died. She finished the book. She did a lot of other things, including some of the best Whitman criticism we have from the 19th century. And this is a painting painted by her son showing their relationship. Better yet, let me show you what she wrote about him. Your book does indeed say all. Book that is not a book, but for the first time, a man complete, godlike, august, standing revealed, the only way possible, through the garment of speech. Do you know, dear friend, what it means for a woman, what it means for me to understand these poems? It means for her whole nature to be then first kindled, quickened into life through such love, such sympathy, such resistless attraction, that thenceforth she cannot choose but live and die, striving to become worthy to share this divine man's life. You might not be able to give me your great love yet, to take me to your breast with joy, but I can wait. I can grow great and beautiful through sorrow and suffering, working, struggling, yearning, loving so all alone as I have done now nearly 3 years. It will be 3 in May since I first read the book, first knew what the word love meant. I almost didn't want to send you this because I've shown you this because it looks like fanaticism, but she really did fall in love deeply with him. And she moved from Hampstead to Philadelphia. He was living in Camden, New Jersey at the time. So she moved right across the water and she brought all of her children, all of her things. She changed her entire life. And of course it didn't work out, but they did remain friends. And she went on, as I said, to write about him very articulately and very kindly. That kind of fandom, I'm going to cross the water now because learning about Davison alerted me to other points of reference with Whitman kind of taking off in the UK. And of course, I saw the show of hands here. You know who Emmeline Pankhurst is. You probably also know about her husband, very supportive, a lawyer, very much in tune with the women's suffrage movement. Did you know that on his tombstone, he has a Whitman quote? And I write it here because it's faded. Emmeline chose it, faithful and true, my loving comrade. And I think I know all of this first from this woman here, Olwen Terrace, who is the librarian at Conway Hall Ethical Society, not too far from here. And I think you told me first, Olwen, about how Whitman appeared in that Sylvia Pankhurst biography, which kind of blew up with how many references there were. So thank you for that, and so many other things. So you have that, right? Them reading Whitman to Christabel and Sylvia and, just getting Whitman in their ears. Then I found out about the Pioneer Club, which is based on a Whitman quote from his poem, "Oh, Pioneers." They had a quote of it as you walked into this very famous and quite exclusive all-female club. So again, Whitman highlighted, apparently there was a portrait of him. That is certainly not it, and I'm not sure who that is. Very few pictures of this place, but just giving you a glimpse. one of the things, oh, I don't think we have it actually, the journal.
I didn't grab that yet.
That's okay. So Millicent Fawcett, well represented here at the Women's Library. We actually hold her journal. And in that journal, she has a lovely transcription of Out of the Rolling Ocean, the Crowd. The poem for me is pretty significant because legend has it Whitman wrote it for a woman who was a fan of his, but her husband protested her reading Whitman. So he wrote this poem specifically to this woman, but it kind of took on a greater significance for women readers. Here's the killer point. Fawcett included a full-page portrait of Whitman in her autobiography. And really, it has more to do with him looking like her father. And also, she was very close with Edward Carpenter, who was very, very interested in Walt Whitman and went to visit him twice in the US. So she writes about that. But I do think it's quite fun that Fawcett she has maybe 6 illustrations in this autobiography. This is the one to read about her, what I remember in 1925. So
was Whitman ever in England?
No. He never crossed. Only Canada. That's the only international place that he went. So I have curated a few Whitman exhibitions, and I'm very interested in material culture, probably because I work on this poet of the body, poet of the soul. And I learned about this auction from a woman named Elizabeth Crawford. Do you know her, Chelsea or Jillian? Yeah. She's a very well-respected scholar of suffragist studies, and she's also very interested in material culture. So she posted on her blog called Woman and Her Sphere. I urge you to look at it. It's very, very good.
What is it called?
Woman and Her Sphere. She posted this sale, which went up, as you see, in 2011, and unfortunately, she sold the items shortly after. So she no longer owns them, but she did a write-up about them. And of course, it captured my interest immediately, right? This is a small portrait of Davison in that little memento. And to the right, does anyone recognize who that is? Give you a bigger picture. It's Pankhurst, Emily Pankhurst. So a really lovely medal. And on the back of this pendant, it says, presented to Mrs. Mary Leigh, drum major, by the WSPU drum and fife band in memory of her courageous fight for women's freedom, December 1909. Leigh was a very close and very, I don't know, maybe a lover, I'm not sure. Leigh and Davison were very, very tight. And she had just been in prison in 1909. And apparently the WSPU gave out these amazing medals to commemorate that. And you can see the WSPU colors, right? Purple and green on here, and just a really remarkable portrait. I really wonder how many got these. It's the only one that pops up in any search that I do. So just really gorgeous. But of course, what caught my eye was the book, which is very, very hard to find. There's a copy at Cambridge, which I haven't seen, and I just learned there's a copy at Yale. I know that it's 31 pages. It's a little selection of Whitman. And the thing to know, you all, is that Whitman first was only available through that Rossetti edition that I showed you. But then kind of when all of this action starts happening, there are smaller publications of Whitman highlighting the more progressive material. I have a feeling that this book was one of them. So there's a lot of words on the screen, just so that you can see that's the description that went up on the Bonham's auction website. And I'm telling you a bit about how Crawford beautifully amplifies and also shows that they've made mistakes. For instance, Bonham's tells you that that portrait was Mary Leigh. That was not, right? Crawford herself, justifies that was indeed Emily Pankhurst. But the most interesting thing, of course, is about the book, why it's with those things. And in the note that is inside of that book, And we don't know who owns it now because the woman who bought it from Crawford has died, and Crawford has lost touch with that family. So I'm not sure if it's going to appear on auction or if it's in the collection. But luckily, Crawford did a very good job on her blog, Woman and Her Sphere, documenting what's inside. And Leigh wrote inside that that book was from Emily Wilding Davison in 1912. And again, remember, Davison dies in 1913, so this is all kind of last minute stuff. And this note is critical, right? 1913, June 14th, in her coffin at Epsom Mortuary, I placed one like this from Lady, what was her first? Lady Linton Caroline? Constance, thank you, sorry. Let's, oh, I was right here. In E.W.D. Davison's hand, open at the page she loved so well. And he also placed these other items. So the picture is that Leigh is there as they are closing the coffin on Davison and places in Davison's hand that book, open to her favorite poem. How I wish we could know what that is. I have a feeling I know which one it is. Crawford adds here the little book itself, this one, right? Not the one in the coffin. So there are two, just to keep it from being confusing, right? One was placed in there, and then I guess Davison must have given more than a few of these books out, and Leigh kept the one that went up for auction, which had been clearly well used, Crawford tells us. Laid in the title page fold of his copy is a pressed flower. So I know there's been a lot of wavering about the sexuality of the suffragists, but it's really interesting to dive into the books and see what they put in them, right? And if you looked on the table, luckily we can do that here, because through Crawford's work, I found out that the Woman's Library has a copy of Walt Whitman that was presented to Mary Leigh, and yet another copy from Davison. So, and it has a letter with it. We have both of those items out for you to look at. They are not timed at the same time. So the letter is November 3rd, 1909. And I wanted you to see it because I think her handwriting shows her exuberance. Here's the second and third pages of her writing. We gotta love this. No surrender. And she's even giving serifs to her emphatic words here. Bravo, Mrs. Leigh. Is very encouraging. So that's 1909, but inside is this wonderful inscription. With all good wishes for the institution of the dear love of Comrades. From Comrade Davison to Comrade Leigh, December 20, 1912. Within months she would be gone, right? But what a final gift. And also notice her underlining, right? Because what I'm going to do, we have the book out and I'll show it to you, but I also wanted to show you on the screen. It's a little bit easier to see. She annotated this book. So you can kind of do a reading of what she was really interested in, or at least maybe what she wanted to really point out to her friend, Mary Leigh. Very interesting collection. And I want to talk to my friend Olwen about this guy, Charles William Daniel, who I just discovered is this radical London publisher affiliated with the anarchist movement, alternative medicine, all the things that usually go with Whitman. And he decided to come out with this little collection, Pearls from Walt Whitman, only 17 poems. Very different though, because 10 of the 17 are from the Calamus collection. If you have not heard of Calamus, that is Whitman's, it has the reputation for being the most erotic, homoerotic poetry that he wrote. Very personal, quite often. What is overlooked is that they're also very political, right? So the concept of comradeship was in some ways personal to Walt, of course, but he also meant it for the broader picture, for the idea of democracy. right? It's again a word we could really use to air out again. And I love that Davison embraced this term. She actually took it in a new direction, right? Because for Walt, comradeship, he used also this word adhesiveness from phrenology, which was often equated with same-sex affection, same-sex love, often gets sort of, channeled as a homoerotic thing. But I think Davison also takes it over to the female side in a really interesting way. So let's see what she does with this book. Just here, a lot of detail for you. Some of the most famous favorite calamus poems. By the way, calamus is a plant that's local to New York. It's very phallic. So that's why, it's part of the reason of thinking about this as a very personal collection of poems. And other really interesting excerpts here from Song of Myself. So Long was a poem that Whitman liked to put last in his collection, and we'll see how she uses it. But this was obviously very meaningful to both Davison and Leigh. I know I'm running out of time, y'all. Here, the editor, who I don't know a whole lot about, says he's using the 1860-61 collection of Leaves of Grass. He's not using the Rossetti British edition for this. So he's going to the most charged American edition to get these poems. These are the ones that these women are reading. And maybe just considering the time, because I want to take some questions and show you these things. I'm just going to show you what I think was probably the poem that Emily's hand is still resting on in her grave. Here it is charged against me. It gets a lot of poems get this single line next to them, and I'm guessing she was trying to attract attention to it for either herself or her friend Mary Leigh, who she gave the book to. But this one also gets those three. She had some sort of code in here, and I need to spend more time with it, but she's really highlighting this poem. I hear it is charged against me that I seek to destroy institutions. But really, I am neither for nor against institutions. What indeed have I in common with them? Of what with the destruction? Of what with the destruction of them? Only I will establish in the Manhattan and in every city of these states. Inland and seaboard, and in the fields and woods, and above every little or large, that dents the water without edifices or rules or trustees or any argument, the institution of the deer. That's what those, it's right there. Right. It is as fitting for Emily Davison as it is for Walt, right? Accepting the locales here. But this idea that it is not about public institutions, it is about love and affection between each other. We do this for each other. We don't do this for a concept. We do it for the human reason. And a lot of her annotations reflect that kind of interest. Really interesting to me that she highlighted I dreamed a dream, which to me is very homoerotic and uses the idea of men, right? Like this idea of a city, a tolerant city in which men can express themselves and love each other without bounds. Maybe I'll just highlight the last lines from So Long, which show maybe a bit of that martyr complex. Dear friend, whoever you are, here, take this kiss. I give it especially to you. Do not forget me. I feel like one who has done his work. I progress on. The unknown sphere, more real than I dreamed, more direct, darkness, awakening rays about me. So long. Remember my words. I love you. I depart from materials. I am as one disembodied, triumphant, dead. That's the last word of the 1860 edition and other editions of Leaves of Grass. So that sort of valor, right? That comes with sacrifice. That's in Whitman too. A kind of a Christ complex. Right? Sorry, I keep saying one more thing. There's a huge auction coming up. It ends March 12th. It's called Deeds Not Words, and it's at the Bonham site. So if you want to see what these material items are going for these days, it's really worth a look. Crawford, Elizabeth wrote to me this morning, it has something to do with her. I think she's selling off part of her collection. She's finding it unmanageable now with the prices going way, way up for these items to actually compete. So some of these might be hers. But Emily Wilding Davison's memorial card can be yours for the estimated £600 to £800. A hunger strike medal, £15,000 maybe.
Wow.
About 3 years ago, one of these sold for £45,000. It is a wild market. And your guess is as good as mine, but I think they so heavily represent solidarity and dedication, right? Sacrifice, things that people are unwilling to do themselves. But when you see other people, it just, you know, it's the right way to be. There's also really awful objects that remind you to stay angry, right? I mean, to me, this is just really obscene. It's kind of a jar. You open up her hat and you can put things like tobacco in there. And around her neck, it says off with the trousers, and her mouth is open. I think it's explicitly sexual, right? Really, really awful. Yeah, and coming with that is like a little bell where one side has a very good looking young lady. This one shall have a vote, right? But the hideous looking older one is the one that's lobbying for votes for women. And just to scare you, some of the postcards that are for sale. I mean, things that you think should not be made fun of, right? Things that should not be humorous to anybody. But at that time, that's what these women were up against. That's what Davison was constantly battling. She has such a reputation for being an extremist. But then I asked myself, if I would see these kind of things, and you know, you wouldn't get your degree from Oxford after you worked so hard, and all these other things that she went through. I guess I just wanted to thank her. So thank you very much for listening to me.